Welcome to Brainwaves Bistro. Grab yourselves a cuppa, kick back, and join us for mental health talk with a positive vibe. Here's Julianne.
Welcome back, Charmaine Woods. It is a veritable honour to have you back to inspire us. And of course, as always, our charming co-host, Barb Smith. Yes, Charmaine, your story, your life story starts from a poor beginning, but in the end has a positive vibe, and it's not over yet. But before we go on and discuss our topic today, I have to say to people, please, if you find any distress or discomfort in what you have to hear during this chat, please reach out. Please reach out to a service in your community or even just a good friend, but don't stay quiet. And I'm welcoming today with a big hi, Barb and Charmaine. Hi, girls.
Oh, hello, Julianne, and hello, Barb. It's lovely to be back with you.
Yes, well, Charmaine, you were very unlikely to become the person you are now today, successful and with such a loving family. You're so blessed. You were born into a dysfunctional, dare I say, impoverished household, a dysfunctional family suffering child abuse and even homelessness from the age of 15. Is that right? However,
yes.
However, you have lifted yourself up by your bootstraps, becoming, listen to this, folks, a police officer, and then going on to studying law, receiving your bachelor's degree, then associate degree, paralegal. We haven't finished yet. Diploma of teaching, diploma of criminology, then certificate 3 in business management. And to top it all off, you are a qualified intelligence analyst and profiler. I'll have to make a TV show about you, I think. Now, these wonderful achievements are certainly inconsistent with the outcomes of too many coming from an abusive background. Tell us, Charmaine, about your childhood years and how you were able to eventually thrive as you do now in life, defying all the statistics.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And as we discussed in my last podcast with Brainwaves Bistro, my childhood was full of domestic abuse, and it was from my mother to myself and also to my father. And in my professional career of 24 years, working in the police force, I actually saw and was exposed to a great deal of domestic abuse also in regards to a specialist unit I worked in. So being able to come in today and talk about it is because I have not only that personal experience, but an extensive amount of experience dealing with the issues that impact on families, in particular navigating the court system, personal violence orders, and the impacts of that domestic abuse.
Yeah. And as you said, we're focusing today on domestic abuse. And Charmaine, tell us how many men and women before age 15 years of age witnessed domestic abuse according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics.
Yes, Julie, I was looking at these statistics, and one of the things, just briefly before I mention them, that I thought was quite interesting was that my homelessness was before the age of 15 years, and the domestic abuse that I witnessed and suffered was before that age too. And the statistics say that before the age of 15 years old, 2.1 million women and men have witnessed violence towards their mother. That's an extraordinary amount of people, and nearly 820,000 have witnessed violence towards their father. So, and then they say it's 1 in 10 men report being physically and sexually abused before the age of 15, and 1 in 6 women report the same before the age of 15. And the interesting fact here that I noted was that we're talking about the violence, the physical and the sexual violence, but we're not yet even covering the other aspects that involve domestic abuse. So I found that quite interesting. And in 2023, the Australian Bureau of Statistics said that 22% of adults reported childhood domestic abuse or that they had witnessed that domestic abuse before the age of 15. So the figures are still there, and that is quite a current indication of what's going on. And then they further broke it down to say that 7.5 was sexual abuse, 9.1 was physical abuse, and 13 was violence towards a parent by another partner. So you can see that the issues such as coercive control and the other complexities of domestic abuse are not even yet covered. So that's quite concerning.
It is very concerning. I had no idea. Wow, that is huge. And investigative journalist Jess Hill, in her book, See What You Made Me Do, declares domestic abuse a national emergency in Australia. And Barb, it is not far from the truth in the United States, is it?
Current statistics show over 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced physical and or sexual violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime, and over 600,000 have suffered childhood abuse in the US.
Yeah, it's worldwide, isn't it? And we haven't even looked at other cultures. What are we talking about here, Charmaine? And this includes emotional abuse as well. And might I add here, according to the UK-based New Scientist, the New Scientist Journal, my early morning read, emotional and psychological abuse affects the same pain centres in our brain, in our primitive brain, the amygdala, as does physical violence. People may not realise that. So we could say, yes, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can physically hurt you. The tongue has no bones, but can be used as a severe pain-inducing weapon. So remember that, folks, before you say anything of unkind nature. And, Charmaine, please describe to us, what do we know about domestic abuse? What is it? How can you describe it holistically or fully?
What I see from both my personal and my professional experience, and one thing that always really, really surprises me is that the majority of people I've come in contact with think it's physical, it's violence. And so it's more of a complex interwoven pattern of behaviours. It can be systematic, it can be reactive on behalf of the abuser. So it doesn't specifically follow a particular, set of rules. We've come a long way, and that is evident because we're all talking about it. There is no longer the silence of knowing without the discussions. And so education and adequate laws and training and support are always factors that will hopefully stem the domestic abuse statistics. So what we do know is we've come a long way, and essentially this very complex issue is bigger than the discussion to be had. So a bigger discussion to be had, we've got to understand the full impact. And in order to do that, we rightly so discuss women because the numbers are staggering, but we are not discussing men and boys and children in general. And this is another part of the collateral damage and something that might just put that bigger picture into scope. So men and women both can feel the shame of being a victim or an offender. And as per the book that you've mentioned from Jess Hill, men are less likely to report the abuse because of the shame or the stereotyping of men as being strong. They couldn't possibly be afraid.
Yeah.
And so I guess the statistics do confirm too that children and girls are either witnesses or victims of the domestic abuse, and this is before the age of 15. So I think we need to have some sort of focus on that particular aspect because children, as we discussed in the last podcast, can grow up with learned behaviours from what they see.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, we talk about domestic abuse. We're discussing males and female partners, female and female partners, male and male partners. It is an inclusive issue for everyone. So how do we define it? Well, I've seen it defined over the years in many ways, and I've seen it called many different things. But I think that Jess Hill's description of domestic abuse is a great overarching definition, and she and from what I've seen also discusses the physical abuse, the controlling of a person's social media, using the media as a means of stalking a person, controlling finances, berating or diminishing individuals, verbal abuse that leads to emotional or psychological abuse, taking away a person's independence and their freedom, isolating them, stalking them. And now we have, in this day and age, AI and other devices that can be concealed or hidden in a person's car or on their body. And these things are readily available on eBay and other places like that. And then we have what we call one of the danger ones, which is the coercive control, because it's very well hidden and it is a sustained pattern of behaviour that is quite controlling and threatening and humiliating to the victim. So as you can see, this is just a list, but it's not an extensive list. There is also lots of other tactics that can be used. And let's not forget battered women syndrome. This is where a woman has experienced prolonged, systematic, traumatic abuse, and she may end up murdering her spouse. It is likened to a subcategory of post-traumatic stress disorder, and there is case law for this legal defence. And I've actually seen some of that. And women do show signs of battered women syndrome when they begin to isolate and they have physical injuries and bruises and broken bones from this long systematic abuse. But let's not forget, as we said, coercive control is considered quite dangerous because it is an effective tool that is hidden in plain sight. So it can be easily disguised and therefore quite dangerous.
Yeah, very, very dangerous and very frightening. And Charmaine, there is a huge underground of victims and perpetrators who go undetected, who do not speak up for fear of reprisals and financial insecurity or shame. Shame's a big word here. And so the statistics are underreported. We need wider conversations, as you agree, to really come to grips with this huge cultural abyss.
Yes, I agree. We need wider conversations to ameliorate the current shocking statistics and to better support the victims. While we cannot ignore the staggering numbers of women who suffer or even lose their life at the hands of a partner, we need to have more discussions about the men, the boys as victims, and also the women as perpetrators, because this is all part of a bigger picture of domestic abuse. More discussions about what children are witnessing or experiencing and how this can be prevented. But of course, this is a tricky subject because we go into that area of child welfare and protection, and that's, as I can say, Julianne, another whole topic.
Which we're going to do. I think we need to do that one because
yes,
there's so much to it. And go on, Charmaine.
And interestingly, author Jess Hill suggests that men are more likely to suffer from the coercive abuse rather than the physical at the hands of a woman. So fear is not always a factor in domestic abuse situations, and this can be misinterpreted quite easily. And boys who grow up to be men and who have witnessed or been the subject of domestic abuse feel immense shame, hence lack of statistical reporting creates anomalies because we're not really getting a clear picture of what is not being reported. So my experience is that men and children, so boys and girls, are less likely to voluntarily report their abuse, and usually it was because the men felt shame about reporting it, and the children had a loyalty or a sense of loyalty to both or one of their parents, or they were at times were placed under duress not to report it. So again, we have another anomaly that, affects those statistics. And this really does enliven the issue that yourself and Barbara and I discussed in the podcast about the significance of learned behaviours in children, which can be repeated in their adult lives. I know a male who was systematically abused by his spouse. And this was psychological, physical and financial. And he went to obtain an order, a personal violence order, and it was found that he didn't need the order because the judge had actually said that he couldn't possibly fear his spouse who was of smaller size to him. And this goes on to what we're talking about, the education around what it actually is that domestic abuse entails. So it's important to understand the transference of the childhood domestic abuse and the impact on both the victims and the offenders as adults. We cannot tackle the issue by focusing on one element or one gender. We must look at the larger picture and all the angles to get the best result.
Yeah, and we really need those results for everybody, for the community
Yes.
and our children and our partners. We've really got to focus on it. Thank you so much for making these points. And Barb, so many mental and psychological disorders may be causal or follow from domestic abuse. This is fodder for another time for Charmaine to come on.
Yes, we know some psychological disorders on the spectrum may be a causal factor for abuse, such as sufferers of antisocial, sociopathic and psychopathic disorders, particularly in men, in perpetrating violence. More women suffer post-traumatic stress from battered women's syndrome, and a sizable percentage of domestic abuse-related injuries can cause brain damage. So yes, Julianne, definitely subjects for us to discuss further.
Yeah. And Charmaine, we are talking children here. From your personal experience as an abused child and as a police officer, what kind of impact does domestic abuse have on children?
Yes, well, Julie, it certainly does have a big impact. And I think that when looking at the book by Jess Hill, I certainly noticed that she did detail the experience of that this has on a child in regards to the domestic abuse and the shame that it brings into their adult lives. And in particular, she did mention men. So what is apparent to me from my experience and my, which is personal and professional, is that domestic abuse in children has a great impact on what they do as women and men as adults, whether they are victims or offenders, the learned behaviours that may come through as a result of this, and do they grow up to be successful functioning adults, or do they turn to substance abuse and crime? And I am sure that we could find statistics that would support that notion. And I've used a little quote here, out of the frying pan and into the fire. And I just wanted to give a little example of what might be part of the impact of that domestic abuse. And I do detail that when I came out of the other side of the domestic abuse, I remember jumping at the first partner that came along because that was the first person that told me I was okay and gave me positive feedback. But in retrospect, the danger of this is that when we want something so desperately, we can potentially pick the wrong partner as well. So there's a lot of issues that result from having childhood domestic abuse. And as you can see, that's another example of that. You know, you might jump into a relationship that's not the right one for you. So I think a good point that Jess Hill makes is that she talks about as children grow, they become attuned to the abuser. They recognise the facial gestures, the tones, the voice, and she goes as far to say that what they do is they become the behavioural detectives, which I quite love that phrase.
Yeah.
And she said, you know, I can confirm from my own experience that this is true. You do moderate your behaviour. You learn how to moderate it so that you can avoid the abuse. And my way of moderating it was to be silent.
Well, thank goodness that you're not silent now, my love, because we'd miss out on a lot. And I know your aim in life is to give back to the community and have people learn from your experience and let us improve our society.
Exactly.
This topic, as you say, Charmaine, has so many complexities and layers. There's so much more. We need further conversation, as we've said before, in policing policy, judicial policy, child protection, and increased refuges, not refugees. They are refugees, actually, when you're driven from home. And there are far too many lives. You wrote this to me. Very importantly, lives lost as a result of domestic abuse, and I hope to further discuss this. We speak of mental health, some both causal and resulting factors of domestic violence, and it is time to remember mental health research, Barb.
That's right. And one of the things, I don't know if we said it in the beginning, was that this episode may bring out some tough feelings for people. So please call out and reach out to someone who can help you. And in the countries that this podcast goes to, there are quite a few different agencies that will be able to help you, and so please do not suffer alone. But just in our wrap up, let's remember mental health research is vital for both mind and our body. Please support us in our crusade to raise money for the not-for-profit Black Dog Institute for Mental Health Research. And as Julianne would say to me, no donation is too small. Help us and our future generations. To all listening, have a great day and a healthy one tomorrow. Thanks, Julianne and Charmaine.
Thanks, Barb. Thanks, Charmaine. Thanks, guys.